The silence of the ancestral estate, a silence both vast and ancient, settled upon me like a shroud woven from dust and forgotten things. My boot soles, accustomed to the crisp click of city pavements, sank slightly into the thick, matted rugs that choked the grand hall, each step stirring motes of light into a slow, golden dance. The air, heavy and cool, carried the faint, mingled sense of damp earth, decaying timber, and something else, something metallic, like old pennies, or dried blood, clinging stubbornly to the faded tapestries. I am Reid, and precision is the compass by which I navigate the world. For years, my life had been a meticulous excavation of history, tracing the forgotten lines of ancient trade routes, charting the rise and fall of phantom cities. My maps were not mere representations, they were echoes, meticulous reconstructions that spoke of forgotten lives and the immutable truths of geography. This estate, however, was a map I had not chosen to draw, a territory thrust upon me by a distant relative's sudden passing, a final, bewildering legacy. The solicitor, a man whose tailored suit seemed anachronistic against the backdrop of this crumbling grandeur, had simply handed me the heavy, brass-bound key. "Everything is as it was," he droned, his voice thin and reedy, "for generations." He had departed swiftly, leaving me to the cavernous quiet of the place, to the oppressive weight of generations of untold stories. My initial survey was methodical, a cartographer's first reconnaissance. I moved from room to room, cataloging the decay, the peeling wallpaper, delicate as old skin, the skeletal furniture, draped in white sheets like slumbering specters, the windows, many cracked, offering glimpses of overgrown gardens that clawed at the stone walls. This was not a house merely old, it was a house that had surrendered to time, its very foundations groaning under the slow, inexorable march of entropy. I found myself in a section of the house where the architecture seemed to twist upon itself, culminating in a peculiar stairwell that loops back to the same landing. It was an unsettling design, a deliberate disorienter, as if intended to trap the unwary in an endless circuit of ascent and descent, a perpetual arrival at the point of departure. Even in its structure, this place defied logic, a cartographer's nightmare. It was in a small, forgotten study, tucked away behind a false wall disguised as a bookshelf, that I found it. The room itself was a mausoleum of forgotten knowledge, stacks of mildewed ledgers, scientific instruments I couldn't identify, and a heavy, oak chest, surprisingly small, tucked beneath a dusty, velvet-draped table. The chest was unadorned, save for a single, tarnished silver clasp. My fingers, usually so steady, trembled slightly as I released the latch. Inside, nestled on a bed of brittle, yellowed silk, lay a rolled parchment. It was heavy, thick, and smelled of earth and something else, something vaguely acrid, like old iron filings or dried ink mixed with a strange mineral. Unfurling it with painstaking care, I laid it flat on the table, brushing away the fine layer of dust that coated its surface. It was a map. And it was unlike any I had ever encountered. The parchment itself was ancient, its edges frayed, its surface crisscrossed with faint creases. But the details. The details were exquisite, rendered with a precision that mirrored my own. It depicted the estate, yes, but not as it stood now. It showed the property as it might have been centuries ago, or perhaps, as it was intended to be. Every grove, every curve of the river, every outbuilding was meticulously drawn, down to the individual stones of the perimeter wall. Yet, it was incomplete. More disturbing were the symbols. Etched into the margins, and occasionally interspersed within the mapped areas, were strange, glyph-like marks. They were not heraldic, nor were they any known form of ancient script I recognized. They looked organic, almost like stylized root systems or skeletal fingers, twisting and intertwining. Some seemed to point towards the blank spaces, while others appeared to mark specific, yet undefined, locations within the existing map, a cluster of trees, a bend in the river, a rise in the terrain. My cartographer's instinct, usually a comforting guide, now churned with a mixture of awe and profound unease. The precision of the existing details suggested a master hand, someone with an obsessive dedication to recording the land. But the deliberate incompleteness, the unsettling symbols, hinted at something far more sinister than mere oversight. This wasn't just a map, it felt like a key to a lock I didn't know existed, a riddle etched in vellum. The motes, disturbed by my passage, danced in the anemic light filtering through the grimy windows, a silent, swirling testament to time's relentless passage. I stood in the grand hall, the weight of the old map of familiar comfort in my grip, yet a growing unease began to prickle at the edges of my meticulous mind. This estate, with its sprawling, untamed grounds, demanded an exploration as precise as any historical survey. My cartographer's instincts, honed by years of charting ancient routes and lost cities, urged me forward. I would reconcile this land with its past, piece by painstaking piece. The immediate exterior was a wilderness of forgotten grandeur. What the modern deeds described as a simple, expansive lawn was, in reality, a labyrinth of gnarled rhododendrons and towering, skeletal trees, their branches clawing at the perpetually overcast sky. Armed with the ancient parchment and a modern GPS, I began my careful survey. The first discrepancies emerged almost immediately. A faint, crumbling outline, swallowed by a thicket of thorns and ivy, suggested a structure not present on any contemporary record. My fingers, accustomed to the smooth precision of drafting instruments, traced the rough, cold stone hidden beneath the foliage. It felt like the remnants of a small, forgotten chapel, or perhaps a gatehouse, yet it was absent from every official document I possessed. A chill, sharper than the autumn air, seemed to emanate from the very stones themselves, clinging to my skin. Further into the overgrown expanse, the shadows deepened with an unnatural density, even beneath the muted light of midday. My flashlight beam, though strong, seemed to struggle against them, as if they absorbed the illumination rather than merely reflecting it. They formed a rough, irregular circle, their surfaces slick with an unseen moisture, even on a dry day. They did not align with any property line, any natural feature, or any known historical use. They simply were silent sentinels guarding an unseen secret. As the afternoon waned, a new layer of strangeness began to manifest. They were not drafts, for the air remained still, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Then came the sounds. Not the rustle of wind through branches or the distant cry of a bird, but something more subtle, more insidious. A faint, rhythmic thrumming, like a colossal, sleeping heart beating deep beneath the soil, would rise and fall, so low as to be almost imperceptible, yet it resonated in the very bones of my feet. I would spin, my heart giving a sudden, unwelcome lurch, to find nothing but the silent, watchful trees. It was an architectural curiosity, designed perhaps for dramatic effect, its worn wooden treads groaning beneath my weight as I ascended. I reached the landing, expecting a corridor leading to other chambers, but instead, the stairwell simply continued, coiling back on itself, leading directly back to the very landing I stood upon. It was an Escher-like deception in wood and dust, a closed loop that offered no progress, only a return to the same point. A wave of disorienting vertigo washed over me. My rational mind, so accustomed to logical progression, reeled at the sheer futility of the design. Why build such a thing? What purpose could it serve other than to confuse, to trap? The map in my hand, once a beacon of order, now felt like a document of deception, its precise lines hinting at a reality that was actively being defied. The land was not merely overgrown, it was actively concealing. And the house, with its looping stairwell, felt less like a shelter and more like a complicit participant in the burgeoning mystery, its ancient timbers groaning with secrets that were only just beginning to stir. The grand hall swallowed the last vestiges of the day's anemic light, leaving me in a deepening twilight. The old map, its vellum skin a tapestry of faded ink and whispered history, remained clutched in my hand, a strange anchor against the growing unease that now prickled not just at the edges of my awareness, but burrowed deeper, into the marrow of my bones. I told myself it was the cold seeping through the ancient stone, the profound isolation of the estate, or simply the exhaustion of travel and the sheer scale of the task before me. My cartographer's mind craved order, reason, tangible proof. A trick of the light, I decided, or perhaps a moth, roused by my presence. The house was old, after all, and full of such fleeting illusions. Days blurred into a rhythm of meticulous study and disquieting phenomena. I would spend hours hunched over the map, tracing its intricate lines, comparing them to old survey records I'd brought, to satellite images I'd downloaded before leaving the world behind. My work demanded absolute focus, yet increasingly, the house demanded my attention. They were never distinct, just a breathy murmur, a sibilant suggestion of language lost to time. The wind, I'd rationalize, whistling through unseen cracks, playing tricks on an overactive mind. Then came the subtle shifts. A well-worn leather-bound book, which I'd placed precisely on the corner of the mantelpiece, would reappear on a different shelf. My magnifying glass, left beside the map, would be found nestled amongst a pile of unused quills. Each instance was minor, easily dismissed as my own forgetfulness, a lapse in concentration. Yet, the cumulative effect began to chip away at my logical facade. I started making mental notes of where I placed every object, a quiet, almost desperate attempt to prove my own sanity. The nights, however, offered no such rationalizations. Sleep became a descent into a landscape of vivid, unsettling nightmares. I walked endless, labyrinthine corridors that were both familiar and utterly alien, the walls pressing in, alive with a soft, persistent thrum. I saw figures, always indistinct, moving just beyond the reach of my sight, their presence heralded by the scent of damp earth and something metallic, like old blood. After one particularly harrowing night, I stumbled back to my study, the image of the writhing map burned behind my eyelids. I forced myself to focus, to re-immerse myself in the objective reality of ink and parchment. There, in the southeastern quadrant, where I had been trying to reconcile a discrepancy in the old watercourses, faint, almost imperceptible lines had emerged. They weren't the precise, deliberate strokes of a cartographer, rather, they seemed like veins, spreading outwards from a central point I hadn't noticed before, a tiny, almost hidden symbol that now pulsed with an imagined, sickly light. It was a glyph, ancient and unsettling, etched into the very fabric of the vellum. I was certain it hadn't been there before, or at least, not visible to my meticulous eye. My breath hitched. The rationalizations began to falter, then crack. My hand trembled as I reached for my magnifying glass, scrutinizing the new markings. They were real. Undeniably there. The map was changing, or perhaps, revealing itself to me. The very object I relied upon for order was now betraying it. A sudden, sharp creak echoed from the grand hall, drawing me from my trance. I moved towards the sound, compelled by a morbid curiosity. It was a sound that seemed to carry the weight of ages, a wordless plea, or perhaps, a demand. The estate was no longer merely old and decaying, it was alive. My determined facade was crumbling, replaced by a growing, undeniable fear.